From the television studios of the Jack J. Valenti School of Communication at the University of Houston, my name is John David Powell, and this is the Discovery section of Graffiti, the electronic newsletter of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Now, as we tape this, the Senate continues its debate on the confirmation of Sonia Sotomayor to the Supreme Court. She is President Obama's first nominee to the High Court, and if confirmed, she will be the third female and the first Hispanic on the court. Robert Carp is a professor of political science. He's been on our faculty since 1969. He's written more than 30 articles in refereed journals, and he is the author of several books, including The Federal Courts and Judicial Process in America. A recent study by Professor Carp found that judicial appointees of President George W. Bush are, on the whole, the most conservative on record. And it's a pleasure to have you with us on this warm summer day.
Glad to be here.
I guess this is probably no surprise to anyone.
No, it isn't a surprise, and I guess I should say it in the context that I've been studying voting patterns of federal district judges for about 40 years, and so you develop a kind of an intuitive instinct as to where they're going to come out in terms of the studies. And I had done some initial studies of the Bush appointees several years ago, and they came out very, very conservative. So now I have much more data, but the data pretty much confirms what we have thought all along, that the Bush appointees are very, very conservative, and they're conservative across the board, not just on a few select issues.
Mm-hmm. And in the issues that you would expect them to be conservative.
Yeah, particularly so. And on issues dealing with the 14th Amendment, the right to privacy, gay rights, abortion, they're just almost off the charts in terms of their conservative decision-making.
Now, this may be surprising to some folks. They may think the Reagan appointees would have been the most conservative, since he seems to be the standard of conservatism, but not so.
Yeah, that's one surprise that I had in this study and that I've seen in the last couple of years in looking at the data. You'd think that Reagan would be kind of the gold standard here with conservative judges, and indeed his judges were conservative. But the W. Bush judges are even more conservative than the Reagan judges, and measurably so. And I guess that surprised me a little bit. I thought that Reagan would be the ultimate standard, but his judges are almost somewhat moderate compared with some of the Bush judge decisions.
And what about 41, George H.W. Bush?
George Bush's father and the Reagan judges are almost carbon copies of each other. I mean, when I do the studies on this, they're seldom more than 1 percentage point apart. Very, very similar.
Okay. And we do expect them to be conservative, taking a look at the Democratic presidents, Johnson, Carter, Clinton. Their appointees, as you would expect, had more liberal rulings than conservative rulings. Yeah,
more liberal, although Clinton, who said he was the most conservative Democrat since Grover Cleveland, his appointees reflect that. They're clearly more liberal than the Republican decisions, but the Clinton appointees are not nearly as liberal as the appointees of Johnson and Kennedy and so on. They're moderately liberal, and that's about as much as you could say for them. And I don't say that as a criticism, it's just simply a commentary.
And how do you go about figuring this out? How do you collect your data?
I collect my data by reading the decisions that are published in the Federal Supplement, which is the primary outlet for the publication of federal district court opinions. And I have a data set now that's up to about 90,000 cases that I have spent the last 40 years of my life collecting. Although I have to say that the vast majority of decisions are not published, so I do have some data on those, but this is the primary place where you go to for these decisions, and I read them, and then by a fairly rigid set of standards, I try to determine whether the case is in a liberal direction or a conservative direction. If I cannot determine that because both sides want a little bit, then I don't include the case in the data set.
How do you do that? How do you decide, well, this was more of a liberal decision, or this was more of a conservative
usually
decision?
It's fairly clear cut. If a union sues a company and the union wins, I code that as a liberal decision. Okay. If a union sues a company and they get a little bit of what they want, but the company wins a little bit, there's no way I can tell really who won that decision. Now, maybe you could if you telephoned everybody and did an exhaustive study of the case, but there's no reason to spend that much time doing that. If I cannot tell who won or lost, I just don't include it in the data set. Probably no more than 2 or 3% of the time, I honestly can't tell, and if I can't, then I just don't include it.
Okay. There is a controversy on this, in that there's a concern that we have judges, federal judges and Supreme Court judges legislating from the bench. Now, is this what you're finding, that they are indeed legislating, whether on a liberal side or conservative side, or are these just rulings based upon case law?
Well, let me make one important point that I think I need to say in defense of the judges and in defense of the judicial system. 90 to 95% of the time in the cases, it makes no difference whatsoever whether the judge is black or white, liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat. It just doesn't make any difference. The law is clear most of the time, and just the judges decide accordingly. I mean, that's the way it has to be, and I'm proud to say that's the way it works. But in maybe 5 to 8 or 10% of the time, the evidence is conflicting, or it's not clear, or the precedents are not clear, or the judges have a lot of wiggle room. And it is there that it makes a difference whether the judge is a Republican or a Democrat or maybe a woman or male. Then it makes some difference. But most of the time, it doesn't make any difference at all. So what I'm looking at here are the kind of the anomalies. Yeah. And where they do have discretion, it does make a difference whether they're a Reagan appointee or a Clinton appointee. But in defense of the system, most of the time it does not. They follow the law, which is what they're supposed to do.
So the system works most of the time.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And then again, depending on which side of the political spectrum you're on, it still works if the ruling is in your favor.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, people elect a president to do certain things, and kind of implicit in that is if the president is liberal or conservative, then you'll appoint judges that to some degree reflect that philosophy, and then that's manifested in the kind of decisions they hand down. I mean, this has happened since 1789. There's absolutely nothing new that's going on now that has not gone on for over 200 years. It's just business as usual, and it's not shocking. It's just the way the world works.
Did any rulings stand out to you as just, what? I don't want to use the word egregious, but big examples of either a conservative point of view taking precedent in the ruling, or a liberal point of view?
You mean in terms of the
sure.
Bush judges?
Okay, the Bush judges.
I think probably at the time when I read some, I might have said, wow, that's pretty conservative, or whatever. There isn't one that just absolutely stands out. And I think it's because judges are professional. They're not going to use a written decision as a vehicle for flying off the handle on some ideological bent. They might think it, they might say it to their husband or wife over coffee in the morning, but they're not going to use a decision to do that. It's just not considered professional. And so I didn't read any decision and I thought, oh my goodness, this is Rush Limbaugh coming out in the decision. I didn't expect that, and I didn't see it.
So you've been studying the courts now for about 40 years or so.
At least since I've been here, and maybe 8 years before that.
Yeah. So what are your feelings over the past 4 decades of the courts?
Well, I'm kind of impressed by I guess a couple of things. If a president is ideological in nature and decides to make ideologically based appointments, then that is exactly what you find on the bench. And we've seen that in the last several years. However, there have been a number of presidents who, for a variety of reasons, have not chosen to make ideologically based appointments. For example, Eisenhower. He said to Herbert Bernal, as Attorney General, just go out and get good people. I don't care whether they're Republican or Democrat, or well, they had to be Republican most of the time, but I don't care if they're liberal or conservative. And as a result, the Eisenhower judges are quite a mixture, as you'd see on the Supreme Court. You get the conservative Harlan, you get liberal Earl Warren. People like Truman. Truman was an ideologue in some ways, but he appointed his judges based on whether they supported him in the 1948 election or not, when the Democratic Party split into several different segments. So as a result, some of the Truman judges are very liberal, some of them are very conservative. So the point is, if a president is ideologically oriented and chooses to make ideologically based appointments, that's what you find on the bench. But sometimes presidents choose not to do that. And as a result, it's impossible to generalize about their judges. Some are liberal, some are conservative. So I'm just struck by the correlation between presidents. If they set out to do something, you find evidence for it. If that's not their goal, then there isn't much evidence for it. And there's really good data to support what I'm saying here over a period of time.
Robert Carp, thank you for being with us. I appreciate you taking the time, and this is going to be an interesting process to watch.
Yeah, it fascinates me. So.
Thank you. Okay. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next month.